We're going to see if we can't get most of the way through the rest of this chapter tonight. We've looked at this as 4 pillars of duty. Those different ideas show themselves prominent in the first 4 verses of the chapter. Well, one of the things we've noted is it can be very difficult to divide several chapters of Proverbs into a sequential outline, so to speak. At the same time, there does seem to be a development of thought and often a correlation of recurring ideas in certain chapters. In this chapter, righteousness certainly stands prominent, but intellectual responsibility, moral responsibility, a domestic responsibility, and material responsibility regarding stewardship and rewards of our actions. That being said, we've moved our way through this chapter. Really, we've gotten to verse 12. And in each verse, we've found at least one of these different pillars as standing prominent. And we'll continue to do that as we move forward. Verse 12, there were 2 pillars that held up the verse. There's the moral aspect. The wicked desires the net of evil men. He's looking for the spoils of evil. He's longing after that. But the root of the righteous yields fruit. The idea of a springing forth and a yielding of that which is beneficial. We want to go ahead and move forward and pick up at verse 13 tonight. Proverbs 12:13, the wicked is snared by the transgression of his lips, but the just shall come out of trouble. At this point, it moves from the idea of how these pillars tend to manifest themselves in words and in deeds, and here the conversation somewhat shifts to the idea of words. Now, deeds are still going to be relevant. In fact, looking ahead at verse 14, there's an emphasis on the fruit of a man's mouth and the recompense of his hands. Well, that's words and works, that our speech and our actions. At the same time, there is a heightened emphasis on our words once we get to verse 13. So verse 13, the wicked is snared by the transgression of his lips. I believe it's the American Standard that has, in the transgression of the wicked man's lips, there is a snare. The point being, his mouth gets him into trouble. This isn't just the typical, has your mouth ever gotten you in trouble? You better not, or else your head's going to get you in trouble. Has your mouth ever gotten you in trouble? Don't tell a lie. But this is not simply that typical, I wish I hadn't said that. This is not your typical form of regret. This is deep trouble. This is the mouth of the wicked that gets him into the sort of trouble that he can't escape. The flip side of it being, the just shall come out of trouble. Well, when I'm behaving justly, oh, and by the way, it's the snare of that wicked's mouth, or his lips, that are getting him into trouble. Can the just be identified by the things they say? Recognized by their words? Sometimes they can be identified by the things they don't say. That's a thought that's going to appear multiple times in this passage. Verse 13, there's an emphasis on morals. And we could also look at that idea of trouble and the different implications of it in terms of it can pertain to our domestic responsibilities, because there are times when a person's lips get him in trouble at home and cause turmoil in the house. It can pertain to material responsibilities, and there are times when the transgression of a man's lips gets him into a financial snare. But generally speaking, this passage is contrasting moral extremes, the wicked and the just. Verse 14. A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. Here is the reward. Here is benefit. But notice it doesn't just say a man shall be rewarded with good by the fruit of his mouth. I believe in the King James, American Standard, and English Standard, the same verb is used in the first part of this verse. And it's always satisfied. A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. I wonder, what if you've got someone that can't be satisfied? Do you think his incapacity for satisfaction, do you think his Mick Jaggerness, I can't get no satisfaction, do you think his inability to know contentment might be evidenced by the things he says? A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. Yes, there is very much in this passage the primary emphasis that the good from our mouths, that's going to be that which is benevolent and encouraging, that which is sound and uplifting, that which is spiritually proper. That sort of speech tends to benefit the people around us, but it benefits us too. What was it Jesus said when the apostles came back to him in John 4? They tried to give him food, but he told them, I have meat to eat you know not of. Well, what was satisfying him, what was filling him was doing the will of the Father, teaching the message. There's a semblance of that here. Can we be satisfied by knowing that we've done good? Can we be satisfied by knowing that we've spoken words that were uplifting and encouraging, words that were proper and beneficial, words that were scripturally sound, words that were reflective of the way that Jesus spoke? A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. You know, we can apply that to evangelism too. Can we be satisfied with knowing that we've endeavored to share the gospel? Now, we're going to put a caveat in here. In the ensuing verses, there is going to be a strong emphasis on the concept of speaking truth. But there's also going to be a repeated emphasis on the warning against speaking harshly. I can speak truth without speaking harshly. Now, if a man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, if it ought to be the case that I can find satisfaction in my mouth being involved in that which is good, of course, the flip side of it, verse 14, the recompense, not the flip side, but another aspect of it, the recompense of a man's hands shall be rendered unto him. There's a reward, not only in words, but in deeds. Now, this idea of the fruit of the mouth is something that will appear again later in Proverbs. We'll see it in chapter 13, verse 2, Proverbs 18, 20. But for now, we want to go ahead and take this thought forward. Ought to be a satisfaction to be derived from the fruit of our mouth. Verse 15, the way of a fool. Whereas verse 14, there was a material aspect to it and a moral aspect. Verse 15, the way of a fool. The word translated fool is that Hebrew word evil. Sounds a lot like our English word evil. And that's actually sort of a good way to remember some of the nuances of the word. Because this evil fool this is not the Casil who's numb. This is not the one who's more dim-witted. This is not the one of whom you say, oh, bless his heart. This is the one whose foolishness is a reflection of his moral fiber. This is the one whose foolish decisions are foolish because he refuses to follow after that which is right. Now, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. He refuses to follow what's right, but he'll tell you otherwise. He'll tell you that what he's doing is right. Time and again in the book of Proverbs, this concept is conveyed. You look at Proverbs 16:2, and the statement is made, all the ways of man are clean in his own eyes. How many people enjoy being told they're wrong? We don't typically wake up in the morning and think, how many ways can I mess up so that I can be chastised today? How many people refuse to admit that they were ever wrong? Well, hopefully we don't set out to do as much damage in the day as we can possibly do and then say, oh boy, I learned me a lot of lessons today from all those mistakes. But hopefully we set out to do the best we can do, and in looking back over the course of the hour, the day, the week, the month, the year, or the life, we can see those decisions that could have been better and say, I was wrong. The way the fool is right in his own eyes, you're not going to be able to convince him otherwise. The flip side of that, verse 15, he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. Wisdom is willing to listen. Proverbs 1:5, a wise man will hear, will increase learning. A man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. Don't be a know-it-all. The know-it-all is not just a personality flaw. It's a soul flaw. It is a moral issue. It is a manifestation of arrogance, of immorality. And the one who is guilty of being this kind of fool is the one who will frequently find himself caught in a snare because of the pride of life. Don't be a know-it-all. Instead, be the one that's willing to say, you know, I think I know how I need to plan ahead. I think I know the right way to approach this issue, whether it be maybe it's a point of difficulty with a family member. Maybe it's a financial decision. Maybe it has to do with approaching a brother regarding a potential conflict within the church. He that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. The word translated counsel carries the idea of a plan, and inherent in it is a looking ahead. But the truth of this isn't limited to seeking counsel for the decisions we haven't made yet. Is it ever beneficial to get counsel for decisions that we've already made? Can it ever be helpful to look back over a series of decisions and ask, could that have been better? Counsel shouldn't only be for the future. Sometimes counsel can help us clarify the past and even the present. Am I willing to listen to counsel regarding the way that I'm behaving and acting toward people today? My decision-making processes in whatever realm of life, because the book of Proverbs hits them all. Am I willing to hearken unto counsel, recognizing that I don't know it all? Is it possible to receive bad counsel? Absolutely. Do we need to do our best to discern between good counsel and bad counsel? Absolutely. Parents, here's a side note. We need to be really careful about getting too upset when our children come to a point in their teenage years or early adult years that they don't take our advice. They're trying to make decisions for themselves. Have you ever given bad advice? Me neither. I can hearken unto counsel without necessarily applying the counsel, because I have an individual responsibility to make a decision based on the best counsel I can get and move forward from there. So we want to be careful about saying, well, he didn't listen to my advice, he must be foolish. No, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, if I'm convinced that my advice is always best, I might be the one described in the first part of verse 15. What'd that say? The way of the fool is right in his own eyes? We go ahead and move forward. So in verse 15, there's the intellectual aspect and the moral aspect, because that fool is one that is of a questionable, compromised moral fiber. Verse 16, a fool's wrath is presently known. Now, once again, we're talking about the idea of our words, what sort of words we give, and whether we're willing to listen to some. Here, the fool's wrath is presently known. The word translated wrath could be translated as vexation. In fact, elsewhere in Scripture, it's used to describe not a fury of anger, but sorrow. It might be better understood if we put this as the fool's vexation, his emotional extreme, his emotional turbulence is immediately known. He's gotten stirred. His heart is a pot and it's a bubbling. And whether it's anger, whether it's sorrow, whatever the negative emotion, whatever his vexation, he's going to make sure somebody knows about it. Now, the flip side of this in verse 16 is a prudent man. The word translated prudent carries with it the idea of one that makes decisions to avoid negative outcomes. The prudent man covereth an offense. The King James has covereth shame. Other translations have hide an offense. I believe it's Kill and Delete that, no, it's the English Standard that translates it as ignores an insult. You know, there are times when our emotions are going to show because of whatever the stimulus was that prompted the emotion. And it was of such an extreme catalyst. Maybe it's news of the loss of a loved one. Our emotions going to show in that moment. Maybe it's learning of the devastation that has come upon someone, or learning of something that can infuriate, that should infuriate. Well, there are times when emotions are reasonable and right. But if we take the fullness of this verse as helping us define the topic being discussed, and if the English Standard has it right, a prudent man ignores an insult. That means that the fool is the one who is at the height of his anger, or at the depths of his sorrow, or at the extremes of his emotions because of a mere insult. You ever been insulted? Boo-hoo. We get insulted. It's going to happen. Jesus got insulted. Did he make his vexation presently known when they spat in his face? When they smote him across his cheek? Oh, no doubt there was a grimace. No doubt there were expressions of pain. But did he make his wrath presently known when they mocked him and scorned him? When every step along the way they were insulting him? Yet how often do we take the slightest of insults as the justification for an outpouring of emotions that have been bubbling up for a while? There's an intellectual aspect to verse 16. There's also a moral aspect. Just because I'm having an emotion doesn't mean that I have to let it take control. Now, please understand, we're not talking about suppressing every emotional reaction to the point that we don't even know how to feel. Because once we forget how to feel, we forget how to sympathize. What we're discussing is not living life on an emotional hair trigger. The fool's vexation is presently known, and he's going to make sure that all the world knows about it as soon as possible. But a prudent man, the one that knows how to avoid the worst of outcomes and he's working toward the best of outcomes, he'll cover shame. That might mean that he doesn't make a big deal about the offense. Or that might mean that he approaches the offense in a way that is less passionate, more passionless, and more peaceful in his interaction. The fool's wrath is presently known. It might be that the prudent man, he addresses the offense, but he knows not to do it immediately. Is it possible for someone to insult you without ever intending to do so? Completely unbeknownst to the individual? Absolutely. Had someone tell me that I looked like one of my parents. How insulting that was. Please pick up on the sarcasm of that. At the same time, are there occasions when people insult us and they know what they're doing? And when someone has set out to instigate trouble, to provoke a negative reaction, how much is accomplished when we give them what they want? If Proverbs 12:16 is indeed discussing how we react in the slightest of offenses and insults, it's going to be good for us to keep in mind there are going to be people who endeavor to insult us just to see our emotional reaction. Why give them the satisfaction? Why not better react in a way that's going to be far more reminiscent of the way our Lord behaved? Verse 17. Here's another emphasis on the idea of truth. He that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness. Here's how the King James words it. But a false witness, deceit. One commentary describes it as he that loves the breath of truth speaks what's right. The idea here, especially when we compare the first and second part of the verses, is going to be this. The words that an individual conveys will be a reflection of who the individual is. The integrity of those words will be a reflection of the integrity of the individual. Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. There are some people that they speak forth error, not because they set out to deceive, but because they've not put in the effort to identify whether or not their words are true or not. This verse is contrasting those who deliberately speak truth because that's who they are. And they are manifesting righteousness. They are exhibiting who they are and their moral fiber. Whereas that false witness is showing forth, manifesting, exhibiting deceit. And folks, when it's someone that you can't believe half the things he says, you really can't believe any of the things he says. Because he has shown himself to be filled with deceit. We're not talking about that which is done in sport and in innocent fun. We're talking about those that are always trying to slant a conversation or misconstrue the facts in a way to benefit self and frequently to cover self. What are you made of? It'll show in how you convey information. Now let's bring this back to the idea of truth as it pertains to the truth of God's Word. What are you made of? Am I going to make sure that I hold to the truth of the gospel? Now there are times when some people, they're learning and there are truths that they need to hear. But did Jesus tell the apostles everything that He wanted to tell them as soon as He wanted to tell them? What were His words to them in John 16:12? I have many things to say unto you, but you can't bear them now. Just because something needs said doesn't mean it needs said right now. The reason that's going to be helpful is when we look at this idea of speaking truth, there also has to be a filter on when and how it's expressed. But that filter does not mean that the truth is shrouded in a lie. Let's go to verse 18. Verse 17 is going to emphasize on a moral fiber. Verse 18 will do the same. There is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword. Now see, some will take verse 17 and say, see, and when I speak truth, I'm showing forth righteousness. So I'm just going to speak the truth. I'm going to tell it like it is. Typically, the folks that will boast about, well, I'm just going to tell it like it is. How gentle are they? How good are they at manifesting love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance? Those are sort of important qualities that ought to be definitive of every Christian. It's called the fruit of the Spirit. Long-suffering, temperance. If the one that speaks truth is showing righteousness, he needs to keep in mind verse 18. Because there are those that speak, but it's like the piercings of a sword. The word translated piercing is more along the lines of a thrust. This isn't the swing of a sword or the slice of a sword. These are jabs. But more so than jabs, they're stabs. the thrust of a sword. I learned a new German word today. Not that I ever intend to learn to speak German, but Schwartmaul. There's a word in the German language, Schwartmaul. It means sword mouth. And it's used to describe those whose language is typically harsh. Sword mouth. Maybe we should adopt that one. Schwartmaul. Sounds like we're talking about a not long series of stores in a building, a short mall. But sword mouth is the meaning. How was it that they used to say it? If you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all. Maybe what should have been said was, if you can't say it in a nice way. There are some things that need to be shared. And there are some things that need to be shared in emergency situations that we don't have time to try to find the softest of answers. But then there are times that we'll turn the most meager of circumstances into an emergency situation just so that we can spout whatever first comes to mind instead of seeking a soft answer that turns away wrath. And in those occasions, our words are Schwartmaul, like the piercings of a sword. The flip side of this, verse 18, but the tongue of the wise is health. Have you ever known anyone that could correct you and make you feel better by doing it? Someone that could point out something you'd done wrong, but do it in such a way that, you still knew you messed up. You still had to eat that slice of humble pie, but you were given hope. You were given encouragement. If possible, you were given the benefit of the doubt that, hey, you messed up. So have I. You messed up, but that doesn't mean that you set out with malicious intent. Yes, there are those with malicious intent. The book of Proverbs discusses those. But if we're endeavoring to correct, if we want our tongues to be health, the word translated health not only carries with it the idea of healing, but it also can connect to the idea of a stillness. There are forms of the word that connect to slothful or not moving, but it's a stillness or a calmness, a peacefulness. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Instead of stirring up, are we trying to calm down? Are we trying to find the words that will diffuse situations or escalate? Whenever our tendency to open our mouths usually leads to more volatile interactions, we've got a problem. Folks, this isn't just about the people that open their mouths and profanity slips forth. This isn't just about the hothead who opens his mouth and he's yelling at the top of his lungs with a sternness that makes anyone that hears it feel like a dog. Oh, he's got a problem also. We live in a society where it's become okay for the ladies who become emotionally distraught just to spill out what's on their minds. The way the fool's right in her own eyes. There is that speaks like the piercings of a sword. It applies to him and her as well. It applies whether we're talking about interactions at work, interactions in the neighborhood, interactions around the table. It applies in how we interact with our wee tykes, our teens, and those that have left the home. It applies in how we interact with our elders, how we approach our deacons, how we talk to our teachers, how we deal with our preachers, and how elders, deacons, teachers, and preachers deal with those that they need to approach. These truths are applicable in every situation. Verse 19, the lip of truth shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Now, there's a caveat here. This verse comes on the heels of verse 17 and 18. Verse 17 emphasizes the need for truth. He that speaks truth shows forth righteousness. Truth is coming out of his mouth. That means there's righteousness involved. But that truth needs to be coming forth from the tongue of the wise, which is health, verse 18. Because if his expressions of truth are only the piercings of a sword, he's got a problem. And that lip of truth is not going to be established forever. That lip of truth is going to have trouble. The truth of one proverb can't be abandoned as we come to the next. And so the encouragement toward integrity in verse 17, toward a charity and a calmness in verse 18, brings us to appreciate just what the lip of truth sounds like in verse 19. That's the one that will be established forever. But the lying tongue is not just the one that spouts random deceits. Sometimes the lying tongue might be the one that's spouting truth, but doing so in such a way as to be the piercings of a sword. Schwartmal. So in verse 19, we've got a moral pillar here as well. And it manifests in the way that we communicate with each other. Verse 20. Deceit is in the heart of them that imagine evil. The word translated imagine, other translations have devise. The word connects to the idea of a scraping, and it can be used in farming to describe plowing. It was actually utilized back in Proverbs 3:29, I think, and translated as devise there. But it's a plowing. In other words, this is someone who's putting his hand to the plow and trying to churn up what he can churn. Deceit is in the heart of them that imagine or plow evil. His heart is filled with lies. Right down to the core of who he is, the word translated heart is lab. Right down to the core of who he is, he's dishonest. He's living a lie. And yes, he's imagining trouble for everyone around him. Notice how this verse 20 can connect to the preceding verses. But to the counselors, he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. A counselor is going to be that one that speaks truth and shows forth righteousness. A good counselor is going to do it so that he's using the tongue of the wise, which is health. And a good counselor of peace. Remember that word translated peace connects to still, or that word translated health connects to stillness. To the counselors of peace is joy. There's a development here that can actually point us all the way back to verse 14. A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. To the counselors of peace is joy. Because the counselors of peace are going to demonstrate integrity in the truths that they share. They're going to show a concern and a care in the way that they share it. They are going to set out to be to the benefit of those that they're counseling. Oh, and they'll be established. They'll be recognized for their integrity. And there's a joy in knowing that they've done what they could do to aid. So verse 20, we'll add a couple of pillars to this. We'll put it as moral, Brother Mosier.
This particular proverb is the source or root of Matthew 5:9. There is a blessing in being a peacemaker. That's all I want to say. It's the root of Matthew 5:9.
Blessed are the peacemakers. You can actually work your way through the Beatitudes, what Brother Mosier just mentioned, and they connect to so many of the exhortations given in the latter chapters of Isaiah, but also to so many of the exhortations given here in the book of Proverbs. Blessed are the peacemakers. The peacemakers are going to be those that are counseling toward, working toward peace, endeavoring to devise peace. And yes, the word translated counselor involves this idea of one who is setting out to devise or produce peace. Here's a question. Again, frequently we'll look at these proverbs in the grossest of extremes, and rightly so in putting some things into perspective. But them that imagine evil, they're stirring up trouble, right? You realize that they're not always named Hitler, Hussein, or bin Laden? Them that are stirring up trouble, or them that imagine evil, sometimes they may attend services on Sunday morning. Sometimes they may stand behind pulpits. Sometimes they may be sitting around that table with the other shepherds. Sometimes they could be you or me. Verse 20, the latter part of the verse, to the counselors of peace is joy. Are we setting out to try to find peace whenever turmoil arises? Are we looking for the best way to respond to the turmoil and just hit it out of the park? To the counselors of peace is joy. Are we the kind that set out to de-escalate, diffuse? Or are we more of the time bomb? Verse 21. There shall no evil happen to the just, but the wicked shall be filled with mischief. You might well see this as an extension of what's just been described in the previous two verses. There's a certain confidence and promise of protection for those that embrace righteousness, being just. So with verse 21, we're going to emphasize a moral pillar there. Verse 22, lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are His delight. Keep in mind, when we talk about lying lips, based on everything else we've already said in this series of Proverbs, lying lips aren't only the ones that are just outright spewing obvious deceits. They may be saying things that are technically true, but they're saying them in such a way so as to push people away from truth. There is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword. So, lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are His delight. Which are we? We'll pick up here when we meet next week, finish chapter 12, and hopefully delve into chapter 13. Thank you very much for your time tonight.